Medical examinations, weight checks, drug testing, and hand wrapping checks are just a small part of the tests that MMA fighters have the opportunity to cheat. So, MMA has a long history of some fighters finding a way to gain an unfair advantage over their opponent. And it all started with the Pride era when there were no doping tests. Some fighters didn't hesitate to use it, because why go into the ring as a normal person if you can become a monster who squeezes out juices? The rules don't have to be followed if there's no supervision, right? Accordingly, in 2015, the UFC introduced the USADA as the first anti-doping program for an MMA sport. The reason for this is the critical period from 1997 to 2007 in the UFC, which had 8 positive tests. Pride had 0 positive tests at that time, but that's because fighters were only tested for recreational drugs like cocaine and weed. In that critical period, many famous UFC fighters injected themselves with all kinds of stuff. Of course, not all drugs were to make them physically stronger. Many used drugs that would help them recover faster after training. But USADA doesn't care about that. With their arrival, the percentage of steroid users decreased, but it is still not at 0.
The steroids, comma?
Everybody's on steroids. The whole UFC, everybody.
The use of steroids can throw shade on the fighter's reputation, but what is the worst that can happen when a steroid user enters the cage is best told by a case from 2013. That year, Michael Bisping and Vitor Belfort clashed in a middleweight bout, where the Brazilian entered enhanced to the gills. The count was knocked out in the second round by a brutal high kick, but the knockout was not the worst thing that happened to him.
We've talked about TRT Belfort. When he was on TRT, he was a different kind of human being.
Fought him on TRT.
You fought him when he was at the Super Vitor.
Fought a guy on steroids.
Vitor Belfort, he kicked me in the head. A few months later, whenever I was in a restaurant, because restaurants are always dark, I'd be like wiggling my fingers and I couldn't see them.
Mike got his retina detached, and the injury led to significant vision loss in Bisping's right eye, eventually rendering him functionally blind despite multiple surgeries. Things got bad when it was later announced that Vitor received a therapy use exemption, or TUE, for testosterone replacement therapy, or TRT, making him legal to use it. This is just one of the brutal results of why nobody likes steroid cheats. There is another problem which can be called legal and sanctioned cheating. In 1997, the UFC took a step forward and added weight classes due to the huge difference in weight between the fighters. As time went by, they created other divisions, and today we have 9 of them. This was a revolutionary move that enabled growth in competition, giving a chance to all weights. But was it?
Za mene recimo najveća prevara u boračkom sportu je to varanje na vagi. Čovjek ima, ne znam, kad
Ja 100 kila i 60.
ja znam, ima 100 kila pa se
Ona na 60.
Ovo skine, ovo zadovolji vagu, ali vaga ne bi smjela biti dan prije.
Da.
Kontrolna vaga, pola sata vremena, ili pola sata prije kontrolna vaga, pola kila je tolerancija. Kako bi se promijenila struktura?
Fighters lose an abnormal amount of weight to meet the scale, but then they rehydrate and regain up to 20% of their weight in less than 24 hours. However, not all fighters have the same capacity to hydrate to regain weight, and their opponents come into the fight with a significant physical advantage, earning the title of weight bullies. Paulo Costa, for example, cuts an incredible 35 pounds to get down to the 185 division, and then returns to 213.8 pounds in the fight with Yoel Romero, which is over the weight limit even for light heavyweight. Alex Pereira is another grotesque being walking at 232 pounds who can fight at heavyweight, but is shedding 25 pounds for light heavyweight. The impressive fact is that he cut an incredible 45 pounds for the middleweight division. If you think that's a lot, remember that 24 hours after the weigh-in, he gained back 25 pounds in his fight against Israel Adesanya.
I don't get how because on the scale he doesn't look super sucked in, like doesn't look like he just got done cutting 20 pounds, but that motherfucker is so massive. He made Izzy look small, and I've been around Izzy. Izzy's a big guy.
Rigorous weight cutting affects the health of the fighters, as you know. Many fights were canceled due to these issues because the fighters pushed themselves to the limit. Unfortunately, we have cases where fighters died while cutting. Yang Jianbing, a Chinese flyweight from the One Championship, died in 2015 after suffering complications following a weight cut. Apart from dying during weight cuts, some fighters know how to steal a few pounds at the weigh-in with a trick called towel gate. The naked fighter stands on the scales, and the towel that protects his private parts is also used as a support. Of course, by doing this, you can remove quite a bit, but it still works. Several fighters have done this, only a few admitted it though, and we know who you thought of first.
We got a lolly. I will not. Using a towel to make weight is okay.
We got you back, DC. You are right. Using a towel is not cheating, but only if they're on you while you're laying down and sweating to lose weight. Now that we've gone through some ways to cheat outside the cage, let's focus on those inside of it. The fence of the cage, for example, is there to limit the fighting area and enable cage wrestling, not to help fighters stand up and not be taken down. Imagine that you are an MMA fighter whose base is wrestling, and you are fighting a dangerous striker. You finally manage to close the distance, work your moves, and lock in to take him down. You put all your power in the takedown, and whoop, you can't move him. The man grabbed the fence, and you just lost your energy for nothing. This illegal action can get a point deduction, but most fighters just get away with a verbal warning. Leon Edwards is a guy who will grab the fence when you try to take him down and then will knock you out. That's exactly what he did in the fight against Kamaru Usman. Okay, maybe Usman isn't the best example, because he used this to keep his opponent pressed against the fence. He has done this at least 5 to 6 times so far, especially in his Ultimate Fighter days.
Kamaru grabbing the cage when he was about to get taken down.
I grabbed the cage.
Yeah.
And I grabbed the cage. I was taking him down.
Fence grabbing dates back to 2002. If you're an old school UFC fan, then you remember when Carlos Newton locked a triangle on Matt Hughes and grabbed the top of the cage. Then you should also remember how that submission worked out for him. There are many different ways to use the fence legally and effectively. Ask former champion Anthony Pettis, he knows what's up. A small trick in the cage can turn the fight around, infuriate the opponent, but also destroy his career. Tim Kennedy, for example, experienced an injustice in his fight against Yoel Romero in 2014 that changed his life and forever disgusted him with professional competition. The Green Beret of the UFC was supposed to be a challenger for the title, but after the dirty games of his battered opponent, Kennedy decided he had enough of cage fighting.
His corner's in there, they're fixing his face. The bell sounds. And I take a couple of steps forward and John McCarthy grabs me. He's like, "No, Tim, go back to your corner." So the Athletic Commission rules are very matter of fact. You have 10 seconds to answer the bell. If you don't answer the bell, it's disqualification. They call it Stoolgate. There is a calamity of errors that John messed up big time. He got played by his corner. The corner spilled some ice. They put on too much Vaseline. They're pretending like they couldn't speak English. There's confusion about like when he had to get off the stool. Ultimately, they were able to buy him an extra 40-something seconds. A huge adrenaline dump, and I get knocked out a few seconds later.
Of all the scams Tim mentioned in this unfortunate situation, he also mentioned putting on too much Vaseline, marking our next bullet point. It's called greasing, and it was done by George St. Pierre's corner when the champ fought BJ Penn in 2009, and it was a black stain in MMA history. The cornerman for St. Pierre was spotted putting Vaseline on his face in between rounds, which was legal at the time. The NSAC and Dana White, however, had a different perspective. They watched as GSP's cornerman doused his shoulders and back with Vaseline. This was and still is entirely unlawful. BJ Penn's limbs were sliding down GSP's body for the rest of the fight. George was like a human soap in the fight. After GSP's victory, the other fighters spoke out, and The Rush found himself at the center of criticism, including Jason Mayhem Miller, Matt Hughes, and Sean Shirk, claiming they felt slippery and greasy after their encounter with the welterweight champ.
It is a problem.
Yeah.
And what it does is, if you want the sport to be more offensive, the more grease, the less offensive on the ground. That's why people want stand-ups, because in the third round, it's just a grease fest. They put Vaseline all over their faces. That gets all over the body. They're super greasy, hard to submit when it's super greasy. It's illegal to grease, but no one's checking. There's no test.
When the opponent is oiled up and you can't grab him properly, there are always his gloves for pulling. Well, you can do that, but that is another way of cheating in the cage, and you will probably get penalized for it unless you are Conor McGregor, of course.
He's putting his fingers in my glove and pulling me down to throw the up kicks. I was trying to let Herb know that. This guy's a dirtbag, man.
A fighter may hold on to or grab their opponent's hand as long as they are not controlling it by using the material of the glove, but by actually gripping the opponent's hand. The same goes for the legs. You can grab the thighs and push the opponent's hips away, but you cannot hold shorts. Anderson Silva, as a dominant champion, should have known the rules when he tried to rip Chael Sonnen's panties during their second fight in 2012. The reason for this dirty move is probably the trauma from the first bout, where Sonnen spent most of the fight on top of Anderson. There was no way that Spider would go through it again, and even more was not penalized for his fingers being in Chael's fight shorts. But that's how it is with fingers in a fight. There is no place where they don't go astray. They mostly end up in the eyes of the fighters, and it often happens by accident, as happened to Bilal Muhammad in the fight against Leon Edwards. Eye pokes can be a fight ending, and the consequences can be dangerous for the fighter's vision. However, not everyone's fingers accidentally end up in someone else's eyes. Yes, we are talking about Jon Jones. If he didn't poke a fighter in the eye during a 25-minute fight, the question is whether he fought at all. It's a coincidence once, but a compilation of his pokes can be made. There is no doubt that Jones uses this tactic as a dirty advantage to keep his opponents at bay.
Doing anything good on him, and he's going to put his fingers in it. He's going to poke you in the eye.
Not all the bells are on Jones, because Chris Weidman can be called the first fighter who achieved a TKO victory via eye pokes, and multiple eye pokes at that. He achieved this thanks to the referee, who saw nothing as if he was the one who was poked in the eyes before the fight. Eye pokes in striking, as we said, can be accidental, but on the ground, very rarely. In 2021, Jillian Robertson had Priscilla Cachoeira in a rear naked choke at the end of the first round. The Brazilian fighter may not have practiced getting out of this submission, but her fingers found a way to penetrate Robertson's skull. Regardless, Jillian got the submission win. Along with this dirty move, Priscilla also missed the scale the day before. Although she had a weight advantage and eye pokes, it did not save her from defeat. Another important fact for today's story is cheaters don't always win. Fish hooking is another malicious way to cheat using fingers, and just like glove pulling, it was Dustin Poirier who had to experience it.
He stuck his fingers in my mouth to lift my neck to get rid of the choke right here.
Do I think I need to apologize? I don't think I do.
Poor Dustin Poirier really has bad luck with other people's fingers, but just like against McGregor, he overcame it and won spectacularly. Some fighters tend to fake fouls to get the DQ win or steal a few seconds to tire themselves out. And here we are again with Kamaru Usman doing it twice against Colby Covington and Leon Edwards.
Wait till the next time I see you. There ain't gonna be no cheap shots. You're not gonna be able to call fake nut shots. You're not gonna call fake eye pokes and get 10 minutes of timeout.
Usman's cardio is impressive. Every time he gets tired, he finds a way to take a break without a point deduction. We will wrap it up with Diego Sanchez, who stole the win by DQ against Michel Pereira in 2020. After the Brazilian fed him with beatings for 3 rounds, one of his knees went astray into the already damaged head of Sanchez, who was grounded according to the rules of the fight. The old and experienced veteran saw his chance to win, and when the referee asked him, he didn't think for a second. I mean, come on. He went through absolute wars in his days, and one knee to the head ruled him illegitimate to continue the match.